coming, and so we'll just jump right off with talking about where you grew up. I know you're from Texas, but you can elaborate a little bit more.
Well, I'm from North Texas, the great state of Texas. That's how we like to say it, Kathy, the great state of Texas. You can always tell a Texan when they say that.
Okay.
I'm from North Texas and a little town called Paris. And my dad was a gospel singer, and my mom was also a singer, and we grew up in the church singing in high school, and all the plays and all that stuff you do. I never actually sang in a place where they served alcohol till I got to Nashville.
Really?
Yeah, and the first place I sang was this 2-story building down on 2nd Avenue. Now it's the gift shop for the Hard Rock Cafe. And they sell T-shirts and stuff there, but at that time it was called the $Silver Saloon, and you had to go upstairs. The bar was Haydite blocks with two 2x12s across it, and you could only get Michelob and Pepsi.
So going back to Texas, were you like the Satcher family, or?
No, we weren't. My family were they farmed cotton, and they were ranchers and farmers and that kind of stuff. My dad, he sang gospel music in the church, in the Baptist church. He was a minister of music. And so we, did a little bit traveling around like that with their little local band. But I didn't really understand about being a professional in the music business until I got older. And I was in high school trying to make a decision about what I wanted to do. And I was a drama major in junior college, which always goes good with singers.
Right.
Natural born drama people. And I wanted to go to college where they had a music program. All my friends were going to Texas A&M. And so I thought, I talked my way into Texas A&M. I didn't have the grades good enough to get in, but I went down there and I talked to the guy. That's when I should have known I was a songwriter, Kathy. And he let me in, no music program. I was in the architecture program, and I did pretty good in the art part until I hit calculus, and then I realized I better not be in the architecture program.
Oh my gosh!
Because I didn't want to learn how to make a bridge stand up. So I came home. It is. Ugh. I came back home to Paris, and I had a friend who lived in Nashville. He's the nephew of Dwayne Allen from the Oak Ridge Boys, and we all grew up together. Dwayne and my mother and daddy grew up together.
Oh, cool.
And so he said, "Come up here and visit me." And I was a decorator, and I was, just doing my job. And I went, I don't know. And I said, I only have about $100. And he said, oh, he doesn't need much money. And I said, okay. So I came up there to Nashville, and on the corner of Music Row, there used to be a building called the Barbara Mandrell Museum. She was a big deal at the time. And there was a little studio in the back where you could go in and record your voice over tracks. And I had never heard myself with reverb or on a track like that. And so for $10, you could, put yourself on Crazy, or put yourself on, Don't It Make My Brown Eyes Blue, or, some hit.
Right.
And so Kathy, I had like $110 left after the gas to come up here. And in an hour, I had $10. I had made 10 tracks, and I was like, I'm Reba McEntire. I was so convinced. I was like, oh my gosh, listen to me. And I found those tapes not too long ago, and I was like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe I dropped those tapes off at people's offices.
Oh, that is so funny. So that was your first kind of demo that you did.
Oh,
then.
I thought, here I go. That's it. They've discovered me. They know I'm here. They did not know I was here.
That is so funny.
I dropped one off at Jerry Crutchfield's office. Jerry Crutchfield, very famous producer and an old friend of mine now, but he was producing Tanya Tucker. He was the hottest guy in town. I took it in and gave it to his secretary, and I said, this is, my vocals. I'm a singer. And she goes, thank you very much. And I told Jerry later, I go, what'd she do with that? He goes, straight in the trash can.
Circular file.
Boom. So anyways, it was okay. It was a good learning experience, and it was enough to make me go home, quit my job, move straight to Nashville.
Wow.
So it sort of propelled me into the life that God purposed me for.
Oh, that's so nice. Now, were your parents reluctant to have you go, or did they try to discourage you or stay with decorating?
Well, my dad, I was a good decorator. My dad wasn't involved in my life after he left when I was younger. And my mother was, they all stood on the end of the driveway and cried as I pulled out on the highway. They didn't like to see the chick leaving the nest. Yeah. But I was 26. I wasn't a baby. But much older than they are now when they come to Nashville. I mean, I write with people who are, 11, So they were a little sad, but they knew that's what I was supposed to do. And then I came and I stayed 2 years before I tried to get in the music business. I joined the choir at church, at Christ Church, which is a great big church.
Yeah.
And every time I thought about, it's time for me to go home, I'm not going to be able to do this. Seemed like God would put something in my path, and it would go, and I would be reminded that I was supposed to be here. So 6 months in, I was singing on Dolly Parton's record, Backgrounds. We did, she used the choir to sing on He's Alive. Do you remember that big thing she did with the Christ Church choir? I was in that group that went in the studio. And then about, a year later, Naomi Judd and her husband began to help me understand about the music business and how to be in the publishing business. I didn't know you could get paid to be a songwriter. I had no idea. I thought everybody wrote their own songs.
Right.
And I just didn't know that was you could make a living at that.
How did you meet Naomi and her husband?
At church. I went to Christ Church, and it was jam-packed the first Sunday I showed up there. And they said, go sit next to that lady in the hat. There's one seat. And so when I went and sat down next to, it was 88, so they were white hot. They were still touring.
Oh, the Judds, yeah.
Yeah, the Judds. And I went to sit down next to the lady, and when she greeted me, it was Naomi Judd. And I just about passed out because I was like, oh my gosh. Well, then she talked to me during church, and she said, what are you going to do for lunch? Because I told her I just moved here yesterday. And she said, come out to our farm. We're taking a bunch of people to eat. Come out with us. And I've been close to them ever since. And they've been a big part of my life and a reason why I'm here, really. She actually really helped me learn how to craft a commercial song. She had just had Love Can Build a Bridge with Paul Overstreet. And she wanted to start hearing some of my songs. And so I would bring them to her. And of course, Kathy, they were like 8 pages long, 14 verses, 3 choruses, 3 bridges, and, jump back to the first verse.
Is that not okay?
Goes, I was like, look at this, novel. And she said, Leslie, she goes, let's work on this one song. She said, I like this song. I can't even remember it now. She said, I want you to take this home. I want you to count the words. I want you to bring it back to me next weekend with half the words. And I went, I can't do it. I've put my soul in it. She goes, half the words. I went, okay. So I'd worked all week long, and I was working for the Baptist Sunday School Board, taking orders. And I did it, and I brought it back to her, and I was so proud. And I go, how about that right there? I'll never forget it. We were at Winona's house at a party. And I said, how about that right there, sister girl? Look at that. Got it. She goes, that's real good. Bring it back to me with half the words. And I was like, I can't do it. That's cruel. She goes, do it, do it. So I took it home, and I worked on it again. I brought it back to her, and I went, there you go. That's the bare bones. She goes, that is amazing. Bring it back with half the words.
4 times.
4 times I wrote that song for her. And when I finally got it down to 2 verses and a chorus, no bridge, and about 25 words, she goes, there's a song. She goes, Leslie, you have 3 minutes to make an impression on the world at that time. Because songs at that time were around 2:58, 3. She goes, you have 3 minutes to impress the world. And she said, literally, you have about 25 seconds to catch their ear. So that first line better be great. And I still abide by that rule. My first line is always, I feel like, one of my best lines of my song.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
What, off the top of your head, can you think of one of your favorite first lines?
My favorite first line of a song is, what do you do with the sands of time when they carve out lines around your eyes? Willie Nelson recorded it, You Remain.
I love that song. I've heard you. Do you mind doing a little bit of that
No, I'd love to do it for you.
That's so
Want me to do
good.
it now?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Oh, sure.
And did you write that with Don Poitras?
I did write that with Don, and we wrote that on a kind of rainy Friday when everybody else had already gone home. And I'd like to tell people we were still really poor, so we were still working. And we didn't go home because it was raining on Friday. And Don asked me, if you could write a song for anybody today, who would it be? And I said, Willie Nelson. And he said, we can't get a song to Willie Nelson. And I said, well, you didn't ask me if we could get a song to him. You asked me who I'd write it for, and I'm from Texas. And he's a huge Willie Nelson fan. And we were sitting there, and he said, well, if what would you say to Willie Nelson? And literally, that is exactly... That's what he said. He goes, what would you say to Willie Nelson? And I said, I would say, what do you do with the sands of time when they carve out lines around your eyes. You can close your fist up good and tight, but you can't hold back the sands of time. That's the first verse.
It's so pretty. I would
Thank you.
Go, go. So you and Don were both staff writers.
He was writing for Peer at the time,
Okay.
I believe, and I was writing for Island Bound Music, Brad and Julie Daniels. And I wrote that first verse like that, and I said, and I looked at Don, and he goes, "What do you do with a memory that just hangs around and stares at me? I could tear that frame down off the wall, but I can't erase the things I saw." And we were right there, and he goes, "What's the chorus?" And I said, "Night and day, night and day, you remain, you remain." It fell out like that, Kathy. And I saw Willie Nelson at the BMI Awards a couple years ago when they were honoring him, and I was just going to tap him on the shoulder and introduce him to my husband, who he already knew, but I was just making sure. And he turned around and he looked me right in the face, and he's shorter than me. He turned around and looked at me and he goes, "You Remain is my favorite song I ever recorded." And I was like, "Could you say that into a microphone?" So,
Hold on.
Could you repeat that one more time for the microphone? But he
honor.
said that to me, and I thought, this is the man who has recorded, "Angel Flying Too Close to the Ground," 7 Spanish angels. Think about that.
Yeah.
It meant something personal to him because I believe, I don't know the whole story, and he's never told me because we're not, he doesn't call me up every day. But I believe Willie lost a son, and it probably means something personal to him because of that. I don't know that for sure, but it might.
Struck a chord.
Yeah.
So you wrote that, and then did you just give it to did you demo it or?
Well, it was a crazy thing, Kathy. I was had just finished my first album for Warner Brothers, and Mickey Raphael, who plays harmonica for Willie, he had played on my album. And so we went in the studio, and I had a recording demo session that week, and we laid that song down in one pass. The vocal, everything. Nobody, and when it was all done, everyone just sat there quiet, all the players, no one said anything, nobody could breathe. I mean, it was God just had his hand on the whole thing, even me singing the scratch vocal. And when we tried to recreate it for the album, we could never get it as good as that. So we used that demo on my album, scratch vocal and everything. And we sent it to Mickey and said, we were actually in Philadelphia, Mississippi, to see Willie. And Mickey was there, and we had the demo, and I said, "Mickey, here's this demo of this song. I mean, I don't know if Willie would consider it, but maybe." So he didn't cut other people's songs at the time too much. And so Mickey took it, and about 3 months later, I was driving down Music Row in an alley in my little car, and Mickey called me, and he goes, "Leslie, can you pull over? And I hear you're driving." I said, "Yeah." And I pulled up behind this dumpster. I'll never forget it, on 18th. I was parked there behind this dumpster, and I go, "What's going on, Mickey?" And he goes, "Somebody wants to talk to you." And I went, "What?" And he goes, "Yeah, hold on." So he puts Willie Nelson on the phone. They were in Hawaii. And he goes, "Leslie, this is Willie Nelson." I go, "Uh-huh. And this is, I'm Jill St. John. Nice to meet you." And I was like, I thought it was somebody just fooling with me.
Yeah, sure.
And finally he goes, "No, Leslie, this is Willie Nelson." I went, "Okay." I said, "Well, it's so nice to meet you, Willie Nelson." And he said, "Man, I love your song, and I'd love to record it." And I said, "Well, it's not my song, it's your song." I said, "We wrote it for you, and I'd be honored for you to record it because we haven't even pitched it to anyone else because we wrote it for you."
Wow.
And he said, "Well, I'm gonna cut it. Thank you very much."
Oh my goodness.
So about a month after that, at midnight, Mickey called me and said, "You've got to fax me a lyric right this second." And I was in the studio, thankfully, and I said, "Okay, what's going on?" He said, "We're fixing to cut that song right now. We're at Ocean Way in LA. And they had been recording all day long on Willie's album, Great Divide, that won big awards for him, that album. And he said, Matt Serletic was producing, and he said, later he told me, he said, there was a stack of CDs, not in the cases, a stack that tall, of songs they were listening to record the next day, to pick something. And Mickey knew that mine was on the bottom. And so when they, it's probably going to go out there in the airwaves now, but when Matt turned around to fill up his coffee, Mickey went, put mine on the top. And so Matt heard it, and he was like, get the band back. And half of them had left to go to another session because they record all night there. And they couldn't get in back. So they got literally like a janitor, was a bass player. They go, get in here. And Matt played something, and somebody else, there was a couple of guys left. They just pieced together, one of the engineers could play something. They all pieced together this band. Willie came in off the bus that they had parked in the back, sang it live. They recorded it at midnight, boom, one pass, exactly like I did the demo.
Wow.
And then Bonnie Raitt came in to do the harmony, and she did a great job. It was something personal for her too. So
that is a great
kind
story.
of a long story. Sorry.
That's so interesting. So yeah, you need to buy Mickey a beer too.
I love Mickey Raphael. He's now touring with Chris Stapleton, so he's just
cool.
amazing talent.
Yeah.
He started with Linda Ronstadt and those guys. So imagine his career.
Wow.
And what he's seen around the world.
Good stories too. So you started as an artist. So when you went from Christchurch to a record deal, like how did Naomi help you kind of with that?
I went first to a publishing deal.
Oh, okay.
I had, someone had told me that, and this was right after I got my record deal, they said, there's a rule in Nashville, which it's not a rule, Kathy. I don't know who said this.
I know what you're going to say.
There's a rule. If you don't have a publishing deal in 5 years, you're not a writer. If you don't have a record deal in 10 years, you're not a singer. And I got my publishing deal on the 5th year and my record deal on the 10th year. I mean, I was like under the wire. So, but I went to, Larry Strickland, who's Naomi's husband. He and Don Potter, who produced some of those albums for the Judds and worked with them, played guitar for them. They had a publishing company, and they were going to sign me as a writer. And that's when Naomi began to get sick and not feel good, and the Judds broke up, and Winona started her solo career. So they were very focused on that, and the whole publishing thing kind of went away. But the great Max D. Barnes, who was a Hall of Fame songwriter,
Sure.
he heard me play, and he carried me around to a couple of companies, and I wanted to write with Island Bound, so I started there. And I started getting songs recorded about 3 years in. It took a little while.
Yeah.
And it seems like it moves a lot faster now for new writers coming in. They a lot of times will come in with a cut.
That's how they get the deal.
But they don't realize that the majority of new songwriters don't get cut after cut after cut. They'll come in with a cut, and then then they start paying their dues, and there's a space before there's another cut. A few will be, on a hot roll for a long time, but mostly they start paying dues. We paid dues kind of before we got cuts. It's kind of flip-flop now a little bit,
Right.
and it's hurtful to the new writers because they don't understand. They think, golly, I had a cut the first day,
Right.
get one tomorrow too.
Right.
And it doesn't work like that, So, but anyway, I got my publishing deal, and I started getting cuts, and a guy at the company that was a co-pub with our company, he carried my demos to Jim Ed Norman at Warner Brothers. And Jim Ed signed me from 5 demos. And then I made my first record for them. And it was an amazing experience, and Warner Brothers was fabulous to me. It was a long process. It didn't just come out the next day.
Right.
And when it did come out, it came out the same week they released Faith Hill's second album. So it was sort of like, I tell people, it was like coming out on a bicycle behind a Mack truck. You're like,
Right.
no way to pass. You're just going, oh no.
Oh.
So it was sort of timing in this business can be it's the deal. It can
Yeah.
make or break you.
Yeah.
But all it gave to me, and the experience that it gave to me, and the friends that I made. Jim Ed is still my friend. He's still running a record label now, and it launched me into an artist's career, and a lot of it now has been on my own, doing as a solo artist on my own. I'm doing my own records, but the freedom of doing your own records and being able to actually put them out, Kathy,
Right.
is an amazing thing.
On your timetable instead of waiting for the label.
And now the business
Yeah.
has completely changed. There are a lot of people don't even want record deals. They won't take them. They don't want to give up what the record labels
Right.
need to have now to recoup. So it's a different, just as long as you and I both have been here,
Yeah.
we've seen it change so much.
I know.
So for the good, I think.
Yeah. So in those times when things aren't happening, or it didn't really sound like you had too much time when you were when nothing happened, but what kind of keeps you going, or what kept you going?
Well, it's always a good cut will always like erase 3 years of okay cuts or not a hit. I've had an odd thing in my career has been that I have a hit about every 2 years or 3 years. I have a lot of cuts in there. I've always been blessed to have a lot of recordings, but I'll have a hit like every 2 years or whatever. So it's sort of like you keep going, you're about to go under, and then you're up again. So it's like George Strait has been very good to me.
Yes,
very good to me, and other people have been great to me. Terry Clark has been great to me. Martina has been great to me. Vince Gill I can't tell you what Vince Gill has done for me. I wouldn't be sitting here if it wasn't for Vince Gill. Almost every song we've ever written, and we've written a lot of songs, he's recorded. So in the day when mechanical, when you could really make money from a song being on a multi-platinum album, that generates a lot of income, and it'll help you, buy a house and make sure your mother is safe and all kinds of stuff,
So when you got one of your first big checks, what'd you do with it?
I bought Mama a Cadillac.
Did you really?
Yeah, I told Marty
That's
Stewart
so cool.
said that was so Elvis of me. he goes, I can't believe you bought your mama a Cadillac. Marty is. And I go, well, it was so funny because I didn't have, it was a Pam Tillis hit. It went to number like 9 or something like that. It just barely broke the top 10. But it was in the day when a top 10 hit it was paid more than a number 1 record pays now.
Wow.
And so it was cranking, and it was solo written, and I was doing good. And so I told my mother after we paid off every credit card, I had my grandmother, my sister, myself, everybody brought their credit cards to the kitchen table when the first big check started coming. I said, and I had my checkbook, and I just started paying off credit cards. And every time we paid off one, we'd cut that thing up and praise the Lord, stick it in a jar. We kept that jar full of cut up credit cards over the stove forever. And anytime somebody even thought about taking out a credit card, I go, look over the stove. They would open them and go, oh, and they shut them. No, cash. We're cash people.
That's so smart. I love that.
But when it was all said and done, I had about $10,000 left over, and I told my mother, I said, we're going to go buy a car today. And she goes, no, Leslie, no. She was sharing my grandmother's car. And I said, by this time she had moved up here, and my grandmother was with us and my sister. And I said, we're going out to buy a car. And she goes, no, we're not. And I said, oh, yes, we are. Get in the car. She was crying the whole way, Kathy.
Aww.
We drove out to the Cadillac place out at Rivergate. And I walked in there and I told him, she's just crying. And I'm, Leslie, please don't do this. Don't do this. And I said, this guy, Billy, I can't think of his name right the last time. He's still my friend. He still emails me. He came up, can I help you, ma'am? I said, you sure can. I said, I want to buy a Cadillac. I want to buy it today and pay in cash. He goes, oh. And I said, I've got $8,500. What have you got? He goes, I have 3 cars in that price range. He goes, let me show them to you. And I go, come on, Mama, let's go look at the cars he has. And she goes, we can't do it. We can't do it, Leslie. And this has happened, Kathy, exactly like this. She goes, we're not going to do it. So we walked out there, and he goes, this one here, and we've got that one and that one. And she goes, no, I like that one. She picked out
if you're going to force me.
I like that one.
That
Boy, she
is
dried it
so
up fast.
funny. Yeah,
and we
exactly.
drove that thing home, and we drove the wheels off that car. It was a good car.
I'm picturing it pink, but
It was
color?
white. It was a big white
Okay,
Cadillac.
nice.
And she called it Maddie the Cadillac. So anyways, we had Maggie until we run the wheels off Maggie, and some kid bought her off us when we moved out here, and he was happy as a lark. He was about to run the wheels off her again. So
That is a great story. So you had that Pam Tillis one, and then what was your next?
that was
kind
like my first big
Yeah.
hit. I Said a Prayer for You, and she had a big video on that. Pam was really doing great at that time, and she was sort of queen bee at that time.
Yeah.
She was doing really good, and she had recorded 2 or 3 of my songs, and that was where what happened to me during that time, Kathy, was something that's rare now. They would record one of my songs. They didn't record just one; they would record 2 or 3, and so I'd wind up with a third of an album, and I was really, really blessed to have that happen to me. Now, because it's so, different producers producing on the same album, and it's not as cohesive as it used to be, that is a little bit harder to achieve these days. But it did happen for me on George Strait, the last big George Strait album. I had several on that album. But that was just a different time than it is now. And now there's so many more, one-off recordings where there's not even an album They're just
Right.
putting out a single.
So with George Strait, then you've had some amazing success with him. So what was how did you get connected with him or his producer or?
Well, I have been friends with Dean Dillon for a long time,
Okay.
and I had been writing with Dean. And I thought, like every writer who writes with Dean, you think, that's it, I'm getting a George Strait cut. And I would write all these things, and we'd get them cut on, Reba, she cut one of our songs, and I think John Anderson cut one of our songs, and it's like everybody but George Strait, and I was like, oh, what am I doing wrong? And finally, I started writing with a real sweet friend of mine named Tim Ryan, who's a great songwriter, and he was an artist on Sony in the day, and great songwriter, and we started writing this fun stuff, and George just loved it, and he started taking it. So he recorded 2 on one album, he recorded 1 on the next album that I'd written with a friend of mine named Bobby Carmichael, and then when Troubadour came along, I was being a little smarty pants, and I went in Sony, and Dean and all those guys were sitting in there having a big meeting. And I said, what are you boys talking about, George Strait? And they're all like, yeah, we were talking about George Strait's album is about to come up. I said, well, y'all better get your running shoes on because I'm fixing to take that record. And they were like, oh, you are? I said, oh, yes, I am. I said, I'm going to have a bunch of cuts on that record, so get yourselves ready. And they were like, all right. And later on, one of them told me, he was like, I wish I'd have believed you that day. Because I did wind up with 3 recordings on Troubadour, and I was really, really blessed. It wasn't me at all. It was just God. But I was feeling pretty sure of myself, and I was just messing with them. But, man, should have done that more, Kathy.
I know, right? You got to show those boys. And
Hey.
the title track, right?
Yes.
Do you want to play? I love that song, too.
Oh, I'll play that.
Troubadour.
This
And
song,
whatever else you want.
Troubadour came along because I had gone to Tony Brown's office, who has produced so many great albums on everybody from, Steve Earle to, the baby Jesus practically. He's done albums on everybody.
Yeah.
And he has, done the bulk of George's career. And he was recording an album for Brooks and Dunn. And I wanted to cut on that album bad. And so I had taken some songs over to his office at Starstruck. And he's a great friend of mine. He goes, Leslie, these are good songs, but no. And I was like, oh, so dejected. And he said, would you write me a song for George? And I went, okay. And I said, what kind of song do you want? And he said, well, everybody thinks George is quitting the business and retiring, and he's not. And, I need something like that. He's still young. He's still out there doing it, something like that. And I went, okay. And the next day, I was writing with Monty Holmes, who wrote, I know she still loves me, but I don't think she likes me anymore. Big hit for George.
Yeah.
And it was our first time to write together. And we were sitting in a little writing room at Sony, and he said, what are you write today, kid? And I said, well, I told him that story. And he said, well, what do you think that would be like? How would that be? And I did the same thing with him. I love to start with the first line and just see where it goes. I had no hook. I had no idea where it was going. I just said, I still feel 25 most of the time. I still raise a little Cain with the boys. And Monty sitting there, he goes, honky tonks on city limits. Man, I'm still right there in 'em, singing above the crowd and the noise. And then there we sat. We didn't have a hook, and we were just stuck. And he goes, what are we going to do now? And he was smoking this little Swisher Sweet cigar, and he's all kicked back, and I was like, and I was standing in the corner of the room, and this happened. Right in my ear, I heard, I almost felt it. I heard Troubadour. Like an angel said it to me. And I said, well, Monty, what do you think about the word troubadour? He goes, I love Troubadour. And I said, well, George loves, his favorite guy is Ernest Tubb, the Texas Troubadour. And I said, he would know what that word means. He would love that. And he goes, well, how? He goes, how about this, kid? Sometimes I feel like Jesse James, still trying to make a name, knowing nothing's gonna change what I am. I said, I was a young troubadour when I wrote in on a song. I'll be an old troubadour when I'm gone. And I tell you, Kathy, that song, it has meant so much to me. It didn't go number 1 because of Kid Rock. I could choke him. He had that summertime song out,
Right.
and it just blocked the whole charts. So it got to 4 and stopped. But it was okay because it was number 1 to me. And I have had more writers tell me that song means so much to me because it's my story. I wish I'd written that. And when we had the NSAI Awards one year, the top 10 songs you wish you'd written, it's a big award to get for a songwriter. It's bigger, it's about the biggest award because your peers vote for it.
Right.
And I won that award that year. And I won one of them. And it means so much to me. It's the only award I've ever hung up, actually, because
Really?
it means a lot to me, that my peers.
We're so moved by that. Yeah. It's such a beautiful song.
Thank you.
So, is there anything else, like, do you have so that's probably is that your favorite cut that you've ever gotten? Or?
It's Between You Remain and that it would be
Right.
probably my top thing.
It's hard to beat those two.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say that I love shoes and I love shopping and I love that Martina song.
Thank you.
Do you mind playing a little bit?
No, I don't mind at all.
God-fearing women.
That
blues?
song was a big deal for me because it was a hit for me right as I started my career with Sony, which I was with Sony 14 years. And I literally had that song right in the door. I signed with Donna Hilly in 2000, and that song came out 2000. And it came out it came out 2 or 3 weeks before 9/11, actually.
Oh, wow.
So it was kind of a odd thing. They pulled it because they wanted her to put I Had Been Blessed out.
Oh.
And because they thought it was more tender because of the 9/11 situation. And they were right to do that. It was rocking up there. I was going, come on. But it was a good song for me. My family was really proud of this song because they all, know they're in it. They know, each one of them knows who they are in the song.
Oh, really?
Yeah, all my aunts and my mother and sister and everybody, they're all like, that's me. And I say to every one of them, yeah, that's you. So they like it because they go, they're told that song's about me.
And it's so rocking.
And I tell them that song's about you.
That's so funny.
In reality, Kathy, this guy had made me really mad, and I came home to a new little guitar I had that, oddly enough, Jim Collins, who you had just interviewed, he had written songs on this little guitar. It was in the writing room at Starstruck, and it belonged to my friend, and they were closing down that publishing company, and they were going, you need to get your things out. And a lot of people had written songs on that guitar, hits. Jim wrote some hits on it. And my friend came and gave it to me. And that day, they all came over. Jim came, I want to get that guitar from you. And I was like, yeah. Because I knew it had songs in it. And that night, I wrote God-Fearing Women on it. The first night I had it. And,
wow.
Yeah, that little guitar's mine.
You still have it?
Yes, I do. It's written a bunch of hits. They all heard her hollering for country mile. Cheating shows you're complete like a style. Well, she took out 3 parking meters and a pedestrian's purse the day she quit the Baptist choir and threw that Ford into reverse. And lock up your husbands, lock up your sons, and lock up your whiskey cabinets, girls, lock up your guns. Well, lock up that beauty shop, no telling if they've heard the news. Call the boys downtown at Neiman Marcus, tell them lock up them high heel shoes. When God-fearing women get the blues, there ain't no slab dab to tell them what they're gonna do. Man, they run around yelling, I got a Mustang, it'll do 80. You don't have to be my baby, I served my last batch of gravy. When God-fearing women get the blues,
fun. Thank you,
Thank
Leslie,
you.
so much. Any last words of advice that you want to tell songwriters?
Well, I will say Max D. Barnes, who is a Hall of Fame songwriter, and he wrote over, I think he told me one time he had over 300 cuts. And that was in the day when it was, it was hard to get a cut, and like it is now. But he was just legendary songwriter. I was out at his house writing with him, and I didn't even have a writing deal. He was signing my songs on one-offs, and he paid me $100, put them in a little catalog he had that later sold, and that catalog had chiseled in stone in it. So it was a big deal for me. But anyway, we were sitting at his dining room table, which it looked like the Clampett's mansion. I'm not kidding. So we're sitting at the Clampett's mansion, right by the cement pond. And he said, I said, Max, if you could give me any advice, what advice would you give me? And he said, well, I've got 2 pieces of advice. And he told me these 2 things, and I have tried really hard to abide by them. The second one is the hardest one. The first one wasn't hard for me. The first one, he said, was never burn a bridge in the music business, because you'll have to cross that bridge again. And he said, you don't want to have someone's feelings hurt. Never burn a bridge. And I've tried really hard to abide by that. And the second one, he said, was never write with anybody who's not as good or better than you are, because you're wasting your time. And I was sitting there and I said, well, but Max, you're writing with me. And he went,
oh.
And that was the biggest compliment anyone's ever given me.
Wow.
So I'll never forget that. And I've tried to abide by it. Now, the second one, I haven't done that as good. I've sometimes, you have to be a good steward of your talent, Kathy. It's a gift to be able to write a song. It's a gift to be in this business. It's a gift to live in this town. It's not, you're not going to change this town. This town will change you. And you can't come to this town and think, I'm going to change this town. The town changes you. And you have to figure out how you're going to fit what you do into what it wants or what it will take. And I mean, it's just how it is. I mean, there have been mavericks who have broken the mold, but then that mold becomes the norm for everyone else.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So you kind of have to figure that out. But the one mistake I see younger musicians and writers doing when they come to town is, I'm going to show Nashville how it's done. No, you're not. Nashville will show you how it's done. And if you could come here with respect and respect the writers that are here, respect the artists that are here, learn about the foundation of this business, learn about that if you're sitting next to Jeannie Seely in a restaurant, who she is and what she did. Because of what Jeannie Seely did, Taylor Swift could do what she did. Taylor Swift didn't invent being a female artist.
Right.
Those people did. And before them, Patsy Cline did. And before them, the Carter family. Go all the way back and learn about the Carter family. There wasn't even a country music business till then. So, sorry to preach, but it's sort of on my heart about respect. I think that's one tiny thing we need more of in Nashville, is respect for the business and the talents of those who've worked really hard to make sure there's a town here.
Right. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.